Hello, everybody. It's April the 6th, and Venus is now in Pisces. I think Venus has been there for a couple days now. I'm just kind of slow on getting my video together, figuring out what I want to say. Um, but here we are. Venus is in Pisces, the exaltation of Venus, which is generally seen to be a pretty positive thing because Venus is a benefic planet that rules over all sorts of nice things like love and friendship and partnerships and beauty and art and creative pursuits and just general nice and pleasant things. So to have Venus in good dignity, basically for the first time in a while, without the influence of Mars and Saturn right now, is a bit of a relief. Um, However, at the same time that Venus makes this ingress into Pisces, Mars and Saturn have been conjoining in Aquarius, and so that it's like you've got two different things happening at the same time, and to some extent, at this moment, anyways, because we're still new, pretty fresh into Venus into Pisces, I kind of feel like the Mars Saturn conjunction may be kind of like casting a shadow over that, or kind of over. Well, I don't know, but it's not really overpowering it because they're two separate things. But that the it would be wrong for me to come on and just be speaking entirely optimistically because there's the Mars Saturn conjunction is a bit of a heavier, bit of more of a downer, I would say. Um, yeah, I don't know. I'll also sort of show you the app that I've got here, and you can sort of have a more of a visual representation of what's going on. So this is the chart today as I'm making this video. Mars is already separating from the Mars-Saturn conjunction, so that's at least starting to ease off now. Um, but if we take it back, yesterday's Venus was on the 0, 0 degree, and the day before that, Venus was at 28, 29, hadn't left yet. So it was really April 5th was the first day, and yeah, when two signs are right beside each other in traditional Hellenistic astrology, they're called to be it's called an aversion. When they're side by side like that, it's like they don't have direct eye contact. You could say they're in each other's blind spots. So there's a sort of one of the things about the Mars Saturn conjunction, which even though it's kind of a not so nice of one because it's the two traditional malefics together. Um, Before, when we had Venus in there, it was not so nice for Venus to be in that situation, rubbing up against the malefics like that. But it actually has the effect of sort of perhaps making that malefic combo a bit nicer, like kind of taking the edge off this a little bit. But that's one thing that I've noticed that with Venus now in Pisces, that Mars Saturn stuff is it doesn't have the Venus influence anymore, so that might sting a little bit more. It might the frustration is not being smoothed over by the Venus niceties. Venus is on and off to new things in Pisces, basically. The good news, I guess, is that Mars is, following behind Venus there, and Mars is eventually going to make it into Pisces as well on, let's see, April 15th. And then Saturn will be left alone in Aquarius for a while, and there won't be so much Aquarius action. Instead, we're going to be having this loaded Pisces lineup again, leading into the Venus Jupiter Neptune conjunction. And actually, at this point in time, April 15th, we've got Jupiter and Neptune together. Um, Perhaps more on that later. Now, one of the other things I'd like to draw your attention to while we're still here on the app screen is that if you look at Mercury, in my last video, I was talking about how Mercury was in the fast part of its synodic cycle, meaning that it wasn't going to spend that much time in Aries altogether, and that once Mercury crosses over into Taurus, Taurus is a Venus-ruled sign, first of all. So there's reception from Venus in Pisces, and if you look at this particular day, which is almost the full moon, let's just put it up to the full moon here. Around the time of the full moon, Mercury is going to be making a sextile to Venus. If you see Mercury is at 11, Venus is at 12, that's only 1 degree off, and there's a sextile with reception. And I personally think this is pretty cool because Mercury's the messenger, the communicator, right? And Mercury is also, if you see there, coming into a conjunction with Uranus. Now, Uranus has the action of sort of shaking things up, disrupting things, destabilizing things, can be a new unforeseen development, a wild card kind of character. And there's also the North Node there, which indicates that we're approaching eclipse season in Taurus. And eclipses generally represent a beginning and an ending. And so there's sort of like this action happening with Venus stuff. And okay, I mean, like in Taurus, Uranus and the North Node, it could actually be kind of dodgy because the disruptions could be kind of chaotic, or it could be kind of out of balance with the North Node there. There could be some sort of major shakeup coming with the eclipses, but because Mercury has got this nice sextile with reception to Venus, and Venus is nicely well dignified in Pisces, there's sort of like this potential for some sort of like breakthrough communications. I think the main thing here is that Venus is a kind of a social planet that has to do with friendships and partnerships and love relationships and all these kinds of things. And Venus is going to be in a strong collaboration with Mercury, which is also getting involved with Uranus. So it's a highly dynamic time, basically. And I don't know. I can get a bit more into this. Maybe it's not necessary for me to keep it on this app screen anymore. I will go back. So if we're doing tropical astrology, the signs are defined by their seasons, basically, the seasonal progression. And Pisces is at the very end of winter, when spring is just around the corner. And so Pisces is generally marked by an attitude of anticipation for things to come, and it's said to be a kind of a hopeful sign, especially now that we have Jupiter in Pisces. Jupiter generally being an optimistic, hopeful kind of planet that has a kind of a generous, altruistic attitude of giving, and we're going to make things better, and we're going to have an optimistic future to look forward to. And so when Venus is getting influenced by that kind of energy in Pisces, I think it's generally kind of optimistic, but at the same time, Neptune is there as well, which may bring in a certain kind of ungrounded quality, right? So it's good to sort of keep your expectations realistic. The thing is with all of this is the anticipatory quality of Venus. It makes sense when you put that together with the upcoming eclipse season that's happening. Now, the thing is, eclipses typically aren't usually seen to be like a positive thing, because it's like the light in the sky is getting blocked out, and that can be sort of disorienting. Well, if you don't know if you've ever seen an eclipse in real life, I caught one that was locally visible a few years back. It is kind of weird for everything to go dark in the middle of the day. Um, but you can imagine traditionally people in ancient times during eclipse, how would they treat eclipse seasons? How did they develop their mythology of what an eclipse meant at with astrology and all this kind of stuff? One of the things we seem to agree upon in modern times is that eclipses seem to initiate a kind of a beginning and an ending. And with Pisces being the last sign of the zodiac, if you use this usual order of Aries to Pisces, and the anticipation for the spring is, in a way, an anticipation for a new beginning. And it could also be the Pisces is kind of like an ending point. It's sort of like the emotional ending of something, but it's an ending that has in mind that the story keeps going. And you could also sort of bring that in with the Pisces symbolism of the two fishes, because apparently the two fishes are actually supposed to represent a parent fish and an offspring fish. And that the Pisces sort of implies the continuity between generations, a kind of a generational continuity where one ending leads to a new beginning and the cycle continues and all of this stuff. And that the I'm thinking that there's a certain spiritual element to Pisces as well. Of course, you could draw a connection to the Christian fish symbolism. Um, but at a very basic level, if you talk about, let's say, the word gospel was meant to be a kind of like a good news, right? And I feel that with Jupiter and Neptune and Venus and Pisces, that kind of gospel quality of, I not that I'm like that religious, but like that have you heard the good news of our Lord Jesus, etc. But it doesn't necessarily have to be about any specific religion. Although the spiritual influence of Neptune is something, and Jupiter is a kind of a teacher influence, right? And Jupiter is already the domicile ruler of Pisces, so we already have strong benefic forces, and having Venus come into the mix is just going to sweeten the deal just a bit more, making it a nice period of time for anything related to Pisces in the chart. Um, but I don't want to get too distracted. My main point was there's this anticipatory quality to Pisces, the good news, what's coming, a new beginning, optimism, all this good stuff. But I mean, this is the whole thing: is that the like eclipses are a little bit more of a shock, right? It's a little bit more like, oh geez, is it really that good? I don't know, right? But here, like what I was trying to show you before, is that there's actually a really tight connection in that Mercury is going to be in Taurus before Venus is, and they're going to have this sextile going on. So there's going to be sextile with reception. So Mercury, the communicator, is in Venus's sign, basically working for Venus. Mercury isn't there yet. Mercury's going to get there. And when Mercury's in there, there could be maybe like this anticipation. It's not going to just going to be like a blind, something's good is going to happen. But actually, it could be. Maybe you don't know what it is because Uranus has this sort of element of unknown, right? Of the unpredictable. But Mercury is going to be mixing up with Uranus, so there could be like unpredictable developments coming through with communications, or there's something about the collaboration between Venus and Mercury, meaning that there should be some sort of action happening with communication and messages, and that Uranus influence acting on Mercury. So some sort of like the developments. I feel like we're going to start seeing developments with Mercury and Uranus, basically, that's going to lead into what's going to happen with the eclipses, and then we're going to get truly a new beginning, a new stage, and it's going to have to do with this Venus Taurus stuff this year. Yeah, I don't know. that's uh that's kind of the gist of it, anyways. Okay, to give a bit more clarity here of when Mercury is going into Taurus, this is today, April 6th. You can see Mercury is at 20 degrees. It's just into the third decan of Aries now. And if we keep going here, Aries, see Mercury moving about 2 or 3 degrees a day, meaning Mercury is still moving pretty quick here. And then by the time we get to April 10th, it's at the anaretic degree. And then April 11th, Mercury is in Taurus. And then Mercury will continue to be in Taurus until April 29th to April 30th. Basically, for the rest of April, the very end of April, April 30th, Mercury's in Gemini. And if you want to get into the eclipses, which is a bit, I mean, this is not really the topic. I mean, it's all connected though, right? So I don't know what I'm going to title this video, but I'm going to talk about Venus in Pisces, but it also relates to Venus in the upcoming eclipses that are coming up, because their eclipses are happening in Venus signs. So here we have the new moon in Taurus. And then if you keep going, here is that is the lunar eclipse in Scorpio. And then if you keep going, then we're in Gemini season. So actually the solar eclipse in Taurus is not going to even be like that on the dot. If you look at the eclipse in Taurus this time around, the sun is only at like 12 degrees and the node is like 10 degrees away, so it's only going to be a partial eclipse. But then as we keep moving into that full moon, which is going to be a lunar eclipse, that the lunar eclipse is going to be much more on the dot this time around. And by the time we get to that, Venus will be in Aries, conjunct Chiron. Ooh, ouch. See, this is what I'm talking about with the eclipses being a little bit more... The eclipses themselves may come with a pinch. What can I say? It may sting a little bit when you actually get to the eclipse. And part of the reasons we can see with that is that when we actually get to the eclipses, Venus is not only out of Pisces, not in that good dignity anymore. Venus will be in Aries conjunct Chiron. You know, we recently just had, like, the last video was about the new moon in Chiron. And so if you had any of those Chiron wounds getting salt rubbed in them recently, then those might get set off again by Venus in these eclipses, because Venus is conjunct Chiron while the lunar eclipse is happening. What's also interesting, if you use Mars as a ruler for Scorpio, then Mars is coming into that conjunction with Neptune at the same time as the lunar eclipse in Scorpio. Mars, the ruler of Scorpio, that's also a kind of interesting one. It could be saying something about the Scorpio quality dissolving. You know, Scorpio having to do with death and rebirth, and, you know, that they're letting go of something that's no longer serving you, is kind of like the cliche line. There may be, with Neptune, the dissolution of Mars-like stuff. Or the kind of, like, it could be like another activation of the Neptune kind of spiritual influence. Like the South Node can have a lot to do with detachment. And so if the lunar eclipse in Scorpio is on a South Node, there could be a very strong kind of letting go, detaching quality to the upcoming eclipses. But, okay, I was supposed to do a Venus in Pisces video, and I've just gotten completely off track here. But one thing leads to another, and here you go. I think it actually could be more helpful to get into some of this other stuff because it helps put it in a larger context. And I think, one of the important things to keep to bring it back to Venus and Pisces is that Pisces is a mutable sign, so it all has to do with transitions and adapting and changes and stuff like that. And so I was kind of going on this angle of the anticipatory nature of Pisces, looking forward to what's going to happen. But there's something about Pisces where it's like the anticipatory quality kind of takes over in a way. And Pisces, there isn't much of a sense of Pisces itself because it's all about looking, like hoping about what's coming up ahead, or else maybe nostalgically kind of processing and looking back, reflecting on the past and getting nostalgic. Like water signs can have a quite a lot of that emotional sentimentality kind of stuff going on. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to get out of this part for now. When I think about Pisces, I'm thinking of the transient nature of Pisces, of the mutable sign, which is all about changing into the next thing, adapting. Like mutable has this quality. Like if you'd compare it with fixed signs are more stubborn about having one thing and sticking with it and just trying to maintain something and keeping it going, whereas Pisces and the mutable signs are more about anticipating, leading into something, and as such, I was kind of thinking about Jupiter in Pisces, and a lot of people were kind of complaining because it's like we've been getting our Jupiter and Pisces sort of piecemeal. Like we had a little bit of Jupiter and Pisces in 2021, and now we're in the big bulk of Jupiter Pisces right now in 2022. But before you know it, Jupiter will be in Aries, and we'll get a bit more Jupiter Pisces on the retrograde. But it's like for being a Jupiter's own domicile, Jupiter kind of like goes through Pisces actually quicker than it does a lot of other signs. And I'd have to I'm not as up on the actual technical details of astrology to really break it down, but I've heard other astrologers talking about it. So it's not I'm like, okay, I'm not just imagining things, that Jupiter does actually race through Pisces pretty quickly. And if you think about like the images of Pisces, fish in water, like slippery fish just sliding along or whatever, maybe it goes with that. The thing is, I'm thinking about with Neptune and stuff like that, and Jupiter playing a kind of a spiritual teacher role. That oftentimes when spiritual teachings have this emphasis on looking at what is an impermanent versus what is eternal, and that so much of what happens in our life is this sort of phenomenal play of changing appearances, of changing circumstances. Everything is subject to change and coming and going and all this kind of stuff. And so, I think the problem with Pisces, when you start to bring in this particular Pisces season, which has all this great stuff like Venus in Pisces, Jupiter in Pisces, benefic planets, well dignified, but the thing is, it's a transient passing moment that may be over before we even realize it. But the thing is about this is there's an interesting kind of problem here, because just because things are transient, not lasting, impermanent, temporary, does that mean that they're completely worthless? Does that mean that there's no point in even bothering in the first place? Like, you could look at this Venus-Pisces transit, Venus-Jupiter transit, and be like, oh, it's only going to last for a month, like, what's the point? Like, you might, Like it's just gonna be a flash in the pan, and what nothing's gonna happen and all. But it's that there's something about the actual embracing the transient and the impermanent. And it's like cherry blossom season, right? Like there can be something that exists in the moment, and then in the moment it's complete unto itself, right? Like it doesn't, like, you could write a story that takes place from today until the end of the month and have a complete story that doesn't need to have a part 2, a part 3, a part 4. That you could have a story just take place in terms of in this time. There's just a temporary passing moment that doesn't necessarily, how it's not going to last. But in this, that could be something. You know what I mean? And you might as well make the most of it, I guess. But that's one thing that came to mind about the Pisces season, is that it definitely does have this very transient passing quality that might kind of give you a glimpse of something, or maybe kind of stoke your hopes about something. But the question, I think, with Neptune especially is is there going to be something actually that's substantial in this coming out of the Pisces? Is there going to be something substantial coming out of it, or is it going to be like, like somebody pouring a beer that's all head, or is it going to be like just all frills and gimmicks but no substance? Or there, like, I actually did an I Ching reading on this, but I don't know. I don't really feel like making this video all about my I Ching reading and the way some other astrologers might do it. But one of the things that I Ching reminded me, basically, is that when we're looking at astrology or anything else like this, it's predicting things. It's showing a certain kind of a stage of a cycle, right? And the thing about a stage in a cycle is that it's connected to everything else that's happening. So if somebody is to be like, what does this transit mean for me personally? If you read the old astrology books, even the old stuff from Hellenistic Greece, the stuff that I'm trained in, they say in order to understand what the actual transit is going to mean in your life, you have to understand the person's life that you're looking at. And now the things, I do a lot of horoscopes online these days, where I'm doing, like, I'll just do for each of the 12 signs, I'll give the horoscope for each transit. The thing is, the problem with doing that is that I'm not actually giving horoscopes for real people. I'm just making stuff up based on the transits as a kind of, there isn't people with charts who are saying, hey Dan, what is going to happen in my life? And if they were saying that, I could, like, actually look at it more closely and make sense of what this transit means in context to what, not just what's in their chart, but what I know about their life, right? And so it reminds me that there's a guy who's influential on me. I actually haven't read his comic books. There's this talk of his that I like. Grant Morrison, basically, had this talk, and he was talking about things to do with manifestation, I guess you could say. But he had this good line that you have to pick something. If you're going to try to manifest something, you should try to pick something that's reasonable, that is within the scope of that's not too. The example he gave, anyways, was that you shouldn't try to be king of the moon, because I'm going to be king of the moon, it's kind of an unrealistic, kind of crazy, fantastical thing to try to accomplish. And if you set that up as your goal, like, it doesn't matter what forces you're working with, you're probably just going to fail, right? So it's like with anybody else, even if you've got, like, you're probably not going to end up being, like, whatever, president of the United States or something, unless that is actually your fate to do that. You know what I mean? Like, you're not. Maybe this is all just redundant. What I'm trying to say, though, is that I think Neptune has this quality of sort of like being a bit detached to the reality of the situation, but it invites, you know, fantasy, imagination. Um, you know, like for a minute, maybe we can forget our life circumstances a little bit and kind of like imagine outside the box the possibilities of what could be. You know, it might, you know, Neptune might give us sort of a vision of another world in which we could live in that's really, you know, it's with the Venus and Jupiter combined, it could seem very like a very sweet vision, but at the same time it could be inaccessible or like a fantasy. Like it just it seems really sweet and nice, but it's just not it's not materializing. It's not something that's really substantially real that's there that you can make happen. And so it feels like a kind of a bummer. And I think that's part of the Pisces quality too, though, actually, because I mean, don't forget that Pisces is a water sign, and I think there's something that is definitely kind of emotional and kind of emotionally heavy, and it brings in this thing. Oh, I wish it could be like Neptune and Jupiter and Venus, and I mean, it is. I mean, we have those forces, but it's sort of like it pulls your heartstrings in that way, and that's typical of what Pisces does. So I don't know. Um, the I Ching reading that I did basically was sort of reminding that if there's anything that is going to substantially come about from a transit like this, you have to understand that it's only what's going to make sense in terms of each of your lives, in terms of the story, if you think of your life as a story that has a certain kind of a narrative progression, it's sort of like what makes sense if you look at what Venus and Jupiter and Pisces, what house that is for you personally, and how does it make sense that this development would come into being? Because it's not just going to do something that's completely, it's not going to just jump to some other part of the story without things coming together in their logical, proper, sequential order. Meaning that you kind of have to put like you kind of have to walk your path one step at a time. You have to, if you have to, in order to like go out on a branch, you have to have a strong tree trunk to support the branch. You know what I mean? And so if the foundation isn't set up, if you haven't been putting work into some kind of a foundation, that a moment like this, you're not going to shortcut right to some amazing outcome if you're still in the midst of the foundational work. You know what I mean? And the foundational, and I mean, so you have to basically look very realistically at what's going on in your life at this particular point of time and see the positives of a Venus, Jupiter, Pisces influence in that area, and make use of that window, because it's not going to last that long, to make use of that window in a way that you get an actual substantial result from it, and not just have your head in the clouds. Maybe you actually come out of this something with action, something that's actually good, maybe, right? But keep in mind too, like I was saying before, that we're going to be having a big eclipse seasons in Scorpio and Taurus. It looks though that the solar eclipse is not going to be like a super tight solar eclipse in Taurus, but we're going to have that lunar eclipse in Scorpio, and then later on in the year a lunar eclipse again in, you know, the eclipses coming at it from the other way around. And the eclipses, there's going to be a big shakeup around Taurus and Scorpio things, and that maybe that this period of Jupiter and Venus, with this Venus being well dignified, having this sextile with the reception for a period of time to Mercury and Taurus, all I'm trying to say is that maybe that we can use this period of time to do some kind of work that will prepare us for the eclipses, and I don't know. Yeah, like the whole point of the eclipses, especially when you factor in Uranus being involved, is that there may be an element of the unpredictable. I'm an astrologer. I'm supposed to predict things, but when Uranus is there, it's like the wild card, unpredictable element. So there's something. I think one other possible element of the Pisces, Jupiter, Venus, and Neptune has a lot to do with, I mean, if you get the spiritual side of it, faith, basically, which is we don't really know what's going to happen with the eclipses this year, but we can have a sense of faith that it's all for a greater good, or that not just faith but the unknown, right? That one of the reasons why I may have some reservations actually about doing astrology is that I think it's a good thing to be able to sit with the ambiguity of the unknown and basically open up to that kind of sense of not knowing what's around the next corner and being comfortable with that, and also seeing the unknown and the unmanifest as a kind of a ripe potential that if you get more comfortable with it, it actually can be helpful to embrace that space of who knows what could happen. And that's kind of actually more for my attitude. I'm actually not so into trying to use astrology to know everything that's going to happen in my life, but there's a strange paradoxical nature of these things that, in a way, that becoming more comfortable with the unknown may open you up to things like astrology, where you're like, oh, wait a minute, maybe now I actually have I can actually see something that's gonna in the unknown that I didn't see before, and maybe the unknown is not quite as unknown as it was, or something. You know what I mean? Like, in a way that the not knowing and the knowing kind of paradoxically becomes the same thing in a way. If that makes any sense. Even if it doesn't, it goes well with the Neptune archetype. Am I right? Am I right? Blech. So, but the basic point is that with the new beginning and the new begin and the new ending and the new beginning, the old beginning and the new ending, that it helps anyways to be open, because if to be open both for things to end and for things to begin. Because if you're closed off, and if you're resisting endings, you're also resisting beginnings. So to be open to both the process of ending and beginning, and to be comfortable with the unknown, and to see that the Pisces transient, you don't have that much time to really work with it, but there's something about Pisces which I think is in favor of this process of the exploration into these weird, unknown, kind of liminal realms. Like, I guess another one that we can work with is the liminal space, because liminality is all about what borders, right? Which borders one from one side to another, right? And so Pisces is from one side of the spring equinox to the other, a new zodiacal new year, if you want to start with Aries. Mutable signs, because they have that transitional quality, mutable signs have that quality of liminality, to be on the fringe. And that they also has that sort of thing about communicating with things which may be outside the norm, right? Like, if you're the kind of person who's going to be talking to spirits from another realm or something like that, it's very, very liminal activity. And so Pisces may be good for that kind of stuff. I'm just going on a tangent, but the main point here is that the liminality is, in a sense, and the anticipation of this eclipse season is very much playing into the liminality now that Venus is in Pisces. And there's a way that we can kind of work with all this stuff together, and I don't know, hopefully something good comes out of it and it's not just a daydream. That's all I'm trying to say. Okay. I don't know. Hopefully this is a coherent video and it's not just too much rambling. This is my take on Venus and Pisces.